Have you ever felt like you're ready to move forward, but another part of you keeps pulling you back? You call it procrastination, laziness, and self-sabotage, but what if I told you that this part of you isn't sabotaging you at all? Instead, it's trying to help you in a way that you don't yet understand. You see, the reality is that when you're struggling with self-sabotage, it can really feel like laziness and procrastination, poor time management, and these surface level things. But in actuality, the real thing that's keeping you held back is your shadow. Now, to describe what the shadow is basically the blind spot of the psyche. It's the place where the sun doesn't shine. And oftentimes people will think the shadow refers to negative or bad elements of ourself, but that's not actually true. It's just the parts of ourself that we've gone selectively unconscious to. And in this way, we can think of the shadow more like a place that we put parts of ourself to forget about them, rather than the aspects themselves or the parts themselves. So think about the shadow as parts of yourself that you've split off from your conscious awareness, put in the dark closet of the shadow to forget about it. And when those aspects are in the dark closet of the shadow, they become autonomous from our conscious personality. What that means is that you, as the conscious personality, you have your own wants and needs and agendas and boundaries and wisdom and experiences. And these shadow aspects also have the same thing. They have their own wisdom and agendas and boundaries and experiences and perspectives as well. So I like to use an analogy to describe the relationship with the shadow and how the shadow can cause us to self-sabotage and hold ourselves back. And so imagine that you are the driver of a vehicle, and that vehicle is your body. So it's your mind-body complex, right? So when you're driving the vehicle and you're like, you know what, I want to take a right turn. And then you go to take a right turn and somehow the car turns left, or the car just stays still. And you're like, well, why can't I take this right turn? But unbeknownst to you, there are 10 shadow aspects in the trunk, each manning their own hidden steering wheel, and each of them are trying to drive in their own direction for their own purposes, right? So consciously, you could be like, oh, I want to take a right turn because I want to create this business. And then another aspect would be like, oh no, let's actually take a left turn because that means that we're going to experience connection. If we start the business, maybe that gets in the way of connection. And then another aspect that's there in the trunk is afraid of failure. So it's just trying to steer you everywhere away from like starting the business that you want to start, because it's like, oh no, if we start the business, what if we fail? So let's like try to avoid going right. And then maybe there's another shadow aspect that's like, oh, let's actually turn to the left instead of to the right, because what if we get really successful with the business and our brother is jealous of us? But consciously, from the perspective of you as the driver, it just seems like, why am I being so lazy? Why can't I just take a right turn? Why can't I just have the willpower to force myself to go right? But that's because you didn't know about the 10 different shadow aspects in the trunk of the car that are all trying to steer the vehicle toward or away from something else that you're not conscious of altogether. And so when you're holding yourself back, it is never just because, oh no, I'm so lazy or I lack the discipline. It is always because there's some elements of yourself that are trying to move you in some other different direction. And if you try to use willpower and discipline to overpower those elements of yourself that are in the unconscious, that are there in the trunk, what's going to happen is that they're going to find even craftier mechanisms to try to get control of the vehicle. And so you definitely don't want to ignore your shadow. You want to be addressing the real root cause that those parts of you are trying to move in the opposite direction of your conscious goals. Now, I have great news for you about each one of these shadow aspects. And the great news is that none of them are sabotaging you just to sabotage you. They always have a fundamental self-interest, bearing in mind these shadow aspects are 100% you. So just like you as the conscious personality are you, these aspects are also you. And because they are you, they're trying to work in your own self-interest, even if it seems like they're not. So let's say consciously that you want to socialize more, but one part of you tries to keep you isolated because you don't yet have the boundaries necessary to feel comfortable and safe socializing. That aspect is trying to protect you, even though it's getting in the way of your conscious goals. And anytime your shadow aspects are getting in the way of your ability to reach your conscious goals, there's always going to be some benevolent, self-interested reason at the baseline of that. You are never doing it just to sabotage yourself or mess yourself over. And so knowing this fact of the benevolent, self-interested nature of your shadow aspects, you can use that awareness to help you become aware of why you're sabotaging yourself and why you're holding yourself back. Now, definitionally, the shadow refers to everything that you're unconscious to, so you won't be able to name off your shadow directly. But what you have to do in order to be able to figure out why these shadow aspects are sabotaging you and how they're trying to serve you by sabotaging you, you have to name them off first for their symptoms. I like to think about the shadow a bit like a root vegetable. Let's imagine a carrot. Right? So the orange part of the carrot, the root of the carrot, is buried underneath the ground. And so if you're going to go picking carrots, you're not going to go looking around for orange because that's not going to be evident to you. That's buried underneath the ground. That's unconscious to you. Instead, you want to get really, really clear about what carrot leaves look like, and you want to look for the green leaves of the carrot, bearing in mind the green leaves look very, very different from the orange root. But if you can discover the leaves of the carrot, you can use the leaves to pull the carrot up out of the ground. The same is true with shadow work. So if you want to become conscious of your shadow, get used to noticing the different symptoms of the shadow that come up, and then explore those symptoms down to the root. For example, let's say that I find myself procrastinating whenever it's the case that I go to work on my business. So the surface level symptom is that I'm procrastinating on my business. So I could name that aspect Business Procrastinator Emerald. And once I've named off my shadow aspect as Business Procrastinator Emerald, I can ask Business Procrastinator Emerald, who is also me, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by procrastinating on my business? And maybe it's the case that I'm afraid of failure, and that's the reason why I'm procrastinating on my business. Or maybe it's the case that I'm feeling like, let's say, overburdened with responsibility and I need to feel more supported. Or maybe it's the case that my work toward my business is causing me to go over my own boundaries in a way that I'm not conscious of, and Business Procrastinator Emerald is trying to protect me from that. But even just starting to ask, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by procrastinating on my business, it automatically shifts the perspective, because typically it's like, oh no, I'm procrastinating on the business, I must be so lazy. How can I use willpower to overcome this laziness? Instead, if we look at those things that are up toward the surface as a symptom, we name off a shadow aspect for it, we can figure out how it's trying to serve us. So if I'm being lazy, okay, lazy emerald, how is lazy emerald trying to protect or serve me? It's like, okay, well maybe it's the case that there's a fear of being let down, and so I'm being lazy to avoid being let down and putting in effort and then being let down for it. I don't want to get my hopes up too high. So the step so far is to recognize that any kind of self-sabotaging behavior or behavior that's causing you to hold back your full potential, anything like that, you can name off as a symptom of something that's trying to serve you at a deeper level than you're currently aware of. And you can name off a shadow aspect for it. And I recommend naming it for the symptom plus your first name. So if you're procrastinating, it's procrastinator plus your first name. If you're holding yourself back, it's holding yourself back plus your first name. If you are people pleasing and that's getting in the way of your goals, it's people pleaser plus your first name. And then you ask yourself, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by engaging in this symptom? How am I trying to protect myself through people pleasing? How am I trying to protect myself through procrastinating? How am I trying to protect myself through holding myself back? And it's not always just protection. Sometimes it's trying to benefit us in some other way. Now, if you'd like to learn more about this, I highly recommend checking out my free webinar, 3 Shadow Work Secrets to Get Out of Your Own Way and Reach Your Full Potential Without Having to Fight Yourself, and the link is down below in the description box. Now I'm going to give you some examples on how to resolve things given the situation in the example, but everybody's will be a little bit different. But this will give you a sense of how to actually deal with these issues that hold you back at the deeper roots. So let's say that I'm procrastinating, and so I name off a shadow aspect as Procrastinator Emerald, and I ask myself, how is this aspect trying to protect or serve me? And I find out that it's trying to preserve something about the status quo of my life, like it's trying to maintain some kind of homeostasis. And if I look deeper, I might find that I am feeling quite threatened by instability, and so I'm wanting to keep things the same. And so maybe I look and I go, like, okay, well, what's making me actually feel unstable? You know, why does this like change, you know, even in a positive direction, make me feel like I'm losing my sense of homeostasis? And perhaps what I find is that I'm not really putting down roots properly, and maybe it's the case that I have a variable identity that's based in something that changes, like my level of achievement or like certain emotions emotions I start to identify with. So I have an unstable identity, or maybe I'm doing a lot of traveling and I'm not putting my roots down. And so now when it comes to actually trying to expand and grow my business, and I end up procrastinating on it because it's too much change, right? I want to maintain homeostasis. So I might keep myself in the status quo to maintain homeostasis, which might cause me to want to go in and procrastinate on goals toward things that are expansive or things that cause a lot of change. And so in that case, I would want to meet my need for homeostasis a different way so that I don't have to come in and self-sabotage myself. And so procrastinator Emerald doesn't need to procrastinate to maintain stability. Or let's say that I have a tendency to start on something and then I fall off the wagon. So I start a lot of things and then I don't follow through, or I don't stay consistent on my routines. And so let's say I name this aspect fall off the wagon Emerald. And this is actually one that I can personally relate to, where I used to fall off the wagon a lot with let's say healthy diet or exercise routines, because there would be this sense of outcome-based motivation where I wanted my body to look a particular way. And then I would feel this sense of, oh no, if I keep going, what if I find out that it's not possible for my body to look that way? And so because I was so focused on the outcome and the fear of being disappointed by not being able to get to that outcome, I would just fall off the wagon before I could ever find out. And so what I eventually had to do is I had to change to a more process-oriented motivation, where it was more about living a healthy lifestyle and just enjoying that lifestyle. Or let's say that I have a tendency to always be switching vehicles. I'll start something and then I'll start mistrusting the vehicle and be okay, well, let me do it a different way, or let me try this different goal. So a little bit like shiny object syndrome. And so let's say that I name off a shadow aspect based off of this symptom, and I call it vehicle changer Emerald. And then I ask myself, how is vehicle changer Emerald trying to protect or serve me? What benefit is it trying to give to me? And what I find is that it's actually trying to give me a sense of control over things in the face of a lack of faith. Right? So if I start doing something and I start going someplace in one vehicle, so let's say I have a certain idea for a business, and I start off with that business and then I start being I don't know, it's been a couple months, nothing's happening, let me try something else. And I start that business and that goes for a couple months and I try something else. If I'm doing that, what that shows me is that I feel I can't really trust for things to take its course. I don't have the faith and the trust that things will actually come to fruition. And then I actually can't, I'm having struggle with surrendering to the outcomes there. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to control things by changing vehicles and saying, okay, maybe it's not going to work out here. Maybe I need to change the vehicle and then that's going to be better. And so it's trying to do something actively to change something that actually takes time to come to fruition. And so in this case, I would want to see where these trust issues are actually coming from. Why can't I trust that if I start on a path that I will get to the end of the path? What causes me to feel like I'm going to be disappointed, or that I have to control everything in order to get to the outcomes that I want to get to, and that if I just continue on the usual way, it's not going to happen? And once I discover the reason why that is, maybe it was the case that maybe I had a parent that didn't follow through or something like that, and it was okay, we were told that we were going to go to Disney World, but then we didn't go to Disney World or something like that. If that was the case, then I would have to actually work through that at the deeper root level and actually face into that vulnerability that's there, that's keeping me feeling oh no, I'm not going to get to my destination unless I take more control by changing vehicles. Now, if you're someone who tends to hold yourself back and self-sabotage, and you've been trying willpower and discipline and time management strategies to try to motivate yourself and it hasn't been working, and instead you're interested in focusing more on what's going on in the unconscious, what's holding you back in the shadow that keeps you from moving forward toward your goals, and you want to work with somebody who's been working with clients for over 7 years, helping people to overcome procrastination and self-sabotage using shadow work, then I highly recommend you put in an application to work with me. The link is down below in the description box. Or let's say that I'm engaging in a self-sabotage strategy where I never give more than 70% of my effort into things. And so I'm only ever giving a C effort at things, because if I gave my 100% and I failed, that would feel like it would mean something about my level of competence or intelligence. But if I only try 50%, 60%, 70%, I could say, okay, well, I didn't fail because of something fundamentally about myself. I just failed because I didn't try hard enough. And so if I name this aspect only give 70% emerald or don't try too hard emerald, I can see it as having this protective function of keeping me from really taking ownership of both successes and failures. And in particular, in the failure direction, it's like, oh yeah, it's like it wasn't me that was to blame for the failure. It was just the fact that I didn't like try, but it wasn't anything about me essentially. And working as a coach over the past 7 years, I've seen this so many times. This is a really, really common protection mechanism that people use that keep them from really being able to reach their full potential and really focusing toward developing a habit of excellence. And so if it's the case that I have this protection strategy, that means I'm trying to avoid some kind of shame or some kind of negative perspective on myself. So I'm trying to avoid feeling like I'm not good enough or not smart enough. And so what I would have to do is I would have to actually exercise 100% acceptance to myself. That's the strengths and the weaknesses, right? So if it's the case that I hit an aptitude ceiling and I'm just not capable relative to certain things, I would have to become okay with that and own that weakness. But I'd also have to let myself shine, and I would have to allow myself to be strong as well. And so I would have to be able to, let's say, run the risk of facing with shame, and when faced with that shame, to be able to really embrace myself in my weaknesses and in my flaws. Or let's say that there's a part of me that sabotages everything when things start to go well. In that case, I would want to name that off, let's say, sabotaging during good times emerald. And in that case, I would want to watch this video right here to learn more about it.